How do we make and multiply disciples around the block and around the world? With hosts Doug Lucas of Team Expansion, Lee Wood of One Body Church, John Hirima of Big Life, Roger Shull of E3 Partners, and special guests from around the world, we'll explore how believers can come together to make more disciples. Welcome to the More Disciples podcast.
Here again with another episode of the More Disciples podcast. I am one of the co-hosts here, Roger Shull, along with Lee Wood.
Hey, everybody.
John Hirima.
It's great to be here again.
And subbing in for Doug Lucas, we have Eric.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. Glad to have you back as a guest host and not just a guest this time, Eric.
Thank you, Roger.
But our guest today is not Eric. It is Britton Smith. And John, why don't you tell us a little bit about Britton, introduce him to us.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm excited about today's podcast. Known Britton for quite a while now. A mutual friend had introduced us, and we finally managed to be in the same city at the same time and had some coffee together and just got to hear Britton's heart. And, it doesn't take long hanging out with Britton to just see the way the Lord shines through him and just his heart for the lost and his heart for the church at large. It's been an interesting relationship over these last several years, but we're really excited now. Britton has, I'll let him explain it more, but he's taken a new role. Just seeing how people can make disciples when they haven't been used to making disciples in their current arena, which unsurprisingly could even be the local church. So Britton, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit and explain a little bit about Pastors and Pioneers, and we're going to jump in with some questions.
Oh man, it's great to be here with you guys. Yeah, I was a pastor for 16 years. I know I don't look old enough to have been a pastor for 16 years, but I was a senior pastor for 12 years. It was about 8 years ago. A friend of mine and I were starting to talk about, as pastors in the church, are we actually making disciples? And we came to this realization of I don't know that we are. And we started hearing about the church overseas and in China, and they were doing these house church things. So we started dabbling in meeting in the house. And we had no idea what we were doing. And so all of a sudden, while I'm exploring this, I get connected to John. My heart was just so set ablaze for other people that were on a similar journey. And John was just so open-handed and so generous with time and relationship and friendship that we just started this journey together with him and a number of other folks that none of us knew what we were doing, but we were seeking the Lord together and just getting together to pray before there was any real structure or even direction in what we were doing. And so I'm grateful for that relationship. And then over the years, getting connected with Lee in the same way, just similar hearts of what God's doing. So it's fun to be on a podcast like this after journeying with a number of you for, a lot of years.
So I met you, I remember, in 2016 at what was the Zume launch, I think, in Tampa. And then we did an actual training, or Curtis did, and I popped in and out at a training in Tampa in 2016. So my question is going to be about this, because you are one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. You can imitate me. You can imitate Curtis. You have an incredible sense of humor. But I have sort of a serious question, because you're that role, like pastor, right?
Yep.
Shepherd, I think, would even be sort of like your gifting, like you're patient, like all those things that I am not, you are. And so can you talk a little bit about the need for people that are more apostolic, like myself, to slow down enough to collaborate with shepherds? Could you talk about that more from a shepherd's perspective, as someone that's actually pursuing multiplying disciples in churches, and what your insights that you've seen over time about that while maintaining relationships? That's a long question, but I think what I'm trying to hone in on is that there are differences of giftings that need to be won, and we actually are divisive sometimes instead of collaborative.
Yeah, I think even for me, it's funny you describe me as shepherding. I think that's only the work of the Lord in me that's starting to grow that in me, because this journey for me of exploring disciple making in churches in a simple way, for me, has been an 8 to 9 year journey. And so I started implementing some of the things I learned in a training in the church and started slowly trying to implement it and transition the church. And we started doing, I would guess it would eventually became like a hybrid. But as COVID happened and I started realizing, the elders started realizing we're still not seeing us living into the fullness of what the church is called to be. We just continue to need to make more changes, be more and more decentralized. And so it was an 8-year journey. And I'm typically actually not a very patient person at all. Just ask my wife, But the Lord just continued to say, you have to grow in loving these people. You have to grow in shepherding. And I didn't have a shepherd's heart at all. And I don't even know that I still have a great shepherd's heart right now. But it was this instilling in me. It's not just getting people to do something. It's not just an end result of a decentralized network of house churches in your city. It's are you carrying the Father's heart of love? Are you carrying a shepherd's heart and people being loved along the way? And honestly, like I did not love people along the way, a lot of it. I think people felt hurt and trying to move them too fast, or I was trying to move all these things. And so I think a lot of it was just surrounding myself with shepherding people that were just more in tune with the people to say, let's go at the speed of the Spirit, but also having an ear attentive to the sheep. And so that was been a long journey. Now, I mean, I can talk about where things are at. I actually left being a pastor in September. And so I'm not doing this anymore. And it's not like I have this success story, honestly, of like, we did this 8-year transition and now it's this, like a decentralized network of house churches. It's still a church and they're still pursuing the Lord in really God honoring ways and trying to figure out a lot of things, but it didn't turn out the way I thought it would be. And I thought, well, if I go patient, if I go slow, then it's going to be like this in the end. And it wasn't that. And learning just to be faithful to the Lord, even in the midst of mistakes, saying, no matter how this turns out, success is simply to walk in step in obedience with the Lord.
Well, I definitely think that you're like Jesus inside of that, bro.
Amen.
Like pretty impressed with your heart. So a lot of respect for you.
I got a question for you, Britton. What did you step out to pursue? Because it sounds like you had church, you had believers, like you could keep on working in there. And like you said, they're still honoring God and what they're doing. But what was the thing that the Lord is really placing in your heart to say, like, man, I want to step out of my role and transition out to pursue this new thing? What was the new thing that you were feeling called to?
Yeah. So even if I back up a little bit, I would say over the past number of years, there's been a growing divide in my heart, right? I've seen a number of years ago of I'm shepherding and pastoring this group of people who are incredible, whom I love, but I'm also seeing a lot of shortcomings based on the word, right? It's not just that we're not making disciples. There's a number of things like not everyone gets to participate. It's very reliant on professionals and there's no little accountability, a lot of things, right? And I'm seeing God work in this more simple way that's empowering people, that's making disciples, that's multiplying. And over the years, I'm just seeing this divide in my heart. And I thought, do I just leave? Do I just leave and let them do their thing and just go off and do this on the side outside of the more institutional setting? And the Lord for years wouldn't let me leave. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I had to soften my own heart. But finally in the fall, he released me and my family. And it's saying, it is now time to step out and live these things that have been on your heart that we've been living honestly for years, meeting in simple ways in our home, being connected with others who are doing the same, making disciples. But the opportunity that's popped up over this past year is to work more directly with pastors. I've been connected in a relationship with a number of pastors, and how do I say this? COVID kicked the snot out of a lot of us. And I think we realized just a lot of the shortcomings and the hurt and the pain of being a pastor and dreaming and longing for something else. And pastors are asking unique questions and pastors are wrestling through certain things. And so what I've stepped into now with a group of guys that this is formed is called Pastor to Pioneer. And what we do is we find pastors and try to connect in relationship with pastors who are asking some of the same questions I was. We're trying to think, man, God's put these things in my heart. Is there a different way to do this? What would it look like if we met more simple ways? Are we being effective as the church? Are we living into the things that God's called us to be? Why is the system killing me? Some of those questions, we walk with them to train them into how to make disciples, pioneer disciple making and simple church work in their cities. But the thing I realized about my own journey is when I started learning this stuff back with Lee and John and some of those trainings, I took the training and just started implementing that with an old mindset of what my role was as a pastor. And I realized that over time, you can't just do it differently. You have to have different mindsets and paradigms to live into these things. I was bringing the traditional church into my house, and I was over functioning as a pastor. And so it's these paradigm shifts of saying, no, how do we think about it differently? And therefore, how do we practice it differently? And so what we're trying to do with pastors, this niche of pastors who are asking some of these questions, is not just teaching them different tools, but walking with them to help shift a different paradigm in a number of ways of what it means to be a leader in the church, what it means to be a disciple, what it means to make disciples, what it means to be the church.
Hey, Brendan, you said early on that you started dabbling in it. What were the things you were starting to see that started to cause the division in your heart?
I was seeing people have a place to use their gifts. I was seeing people taking ownership of faith and having the ability to know what to do on their own. I saw people having tools and a heart for the lost and able to share the gospel. And for me, the divide really came honestly during COVID. And I was reading through Acts. And at that time in my church, when COVID hit, we'd been training people to be the church in a simple way. And so we didn't live stream. We just said, we can't do that because we've been equipping you to be the church. So we have one option for you, which is to be the church in a simple way. We'll coach you, we'll walk with you. And we saw some people go that route if they hadn't already done that, and a number of people didn't. And I just saw this divide in how people were doing, if they were engaged in the church in a simple way or where they weren't. I was hearing things of people that were engaged in the church in a simple way of like, this is amazing. I feel cared for. I feel connected. My faith is alive. I'm having a mindset to reach my neighbors. This has been great for my family. And those that didn't engage, I feel alone. I feel lost. I feel dying or drowning. And I was reading through Acts, and I got to Acts chapter 8, the summer of 2020. And Acts chapter 8 talks about how they were scattered because of persecution, and the leaders stayed in Jerusalem. And as people were scattered, no matter what they went, they preached the gospel. And it dawned on me, wow, everyone knew what to do. No matter where they went, they knew what to do. And they were thriving. And I thought that is such a different thing I'm seeing in my midst of people knowing what to do. If they were connected in these relationships in the home, they knew what to do and they were thriving without leaders being there compared to those that maybe weren't engaging in that way. So I think I was seeing these differences more and more as my heart began to break, because I wanted this other group to come along. You want them to experience it. Like, come on, guys, this is awesome. It just began to create greater and greater turmoil in my own heart.
Hey, Britton, I'm excited about this. This is where the rubber's hitting the road in a lot of different relationships out there. And as pioneers come alongside of pastors, helping them to maybe see, I just thought the question of what do the pioneers need to know more about the pastors to help them in those conversations, and vice versa? What do those pastors need to know about the pioneers to help improve, just so that there's not fire, like wrong kind of fire happening in those relationships and in those conversations, to help both sides make a good advancement into the kingdom here, into the kingdom practices?
Yeah, I think it just starts with an understanding of not every pastor is going to be called out to pioneer new work. I mean, it's not the way I think that's going to happen. I don't think this is for everybody. And I think God's going to call people to stick to this way of doing it, or that way of doing it, or that way of doing it. And that's awesome. And so I think it's looking for the niche group of people that are saying, okay, maybe I am being called to something different, or maybe this is something rests in my heart. Is there another option? I think it's understanding that this really is for a niche group of pastors or former pastors that have stepped away to help train and coach and walk with them in something else, and not to be like, it's for every pastor needs to leave, right? It's like, no, nonsense, right? It's where's the Spirit stirring for those people to call to be drawn out to be pioneers of new work in their cities.
Yeah, I think that's really good, Britton, and to understand that there are differences of administrations, differences of operations, but the self-same Spirit. And so that dynamic of diversity operating in unity, even as church models, is a part of the whole. So we've had like Ron Johnson on from Denver, and then we're going to have another guest on soon, Lee Constantino from Topeka, and that have pastored for a long time, just like other people have that are pursuing like hybrid models, like you attempted to. So I think I'd like for you to try and speak about that a little bit more. I have a two-part question, is that like, as I view hybrid models, basically churches we know it or legacy, and a parallel track of DMM, CPM, where they don't intersect. What do you have to say about both and as opposed to either or? And then second of all, I think that a lot of pastors thinking about this are going to wonder about the piece of how's that going to work for my family? What's that?
Yeah, that's such good.
What's that look like for me, my wife, and my kids. I think about our own relationship and like, bro, come on, get on with it, dude. But I remember also at first saying, man, I think that you're called, that you should stay inside of there and do both, man. Like I remember that conversation. And sometimes it doesn't work, right? So can you sort of talk about all that stuff that I tried to phrase into a question and didn't do it well?
No, yeah, I've been with you long enough I can interpret Lee speak, so I'm good. I think Lee, and really is a good question, because I think our natural tendency is to do a hybrid model, because when we love the people typically that we're with, and it feels like a manageable next step. And I would have left years ago if the Lord would have said leave, but he just like he wouldn't let me. And so it ended up trying the hybrid thing. And this might be controversial, and this is only my opinion, man.
We're about controversy, man. It's all good.
Okay, right. Well, I think there's probably people out there that are smarter than me and more gifted that could have made it work. I just don't know how you make the hybrid thing work, because I think what I realized over time is you're not just doing it differently. You're actually playing by two different sets of rules and principles most of the time. It's like you're on the field trying to play basketball and soccer at the same time. Like there's some overlap that you have a ball, but you're like, we're doing different things and like operating by different principles. So I honestly, again, maybe people could figure it out. I think for most people, the better option would be to release the pioneer to start a work outside of it. And you can still be in a relationship and friendship, right? But I think it just telling you personally, like it was a long, hard, painful journey to try to transition something, and it really not turn out how I thought it would in the end. Now, if the Lord tells you to do it differently, the Lord tells you to stay in hybrid, then you got to obey the Lord, not us. But like, I just think as leaders, especially like more visionary leaders, we're so optimistic. We think, why wouldn't people want to do this? Why wouldn't people want to come along? And we just see into the future. And I think a lot of people, you're coming against hundreds of years of tradition and things that we hold deeply that just are going to take a long time and are hard to make that jump. So I guess I would say I don't necessarily recommend a hybrid, and I think people will find more freedom in trying to do it on the outside, unless Lord tells you.
I think
so. Then they get.
I think inside there too is like we say hybrid, but like what you said when you release the pioneer, what's the gap from people realizing, okay, those are just words. That's still the church. In other words, this is the church. I mean, here's the church and this is the church. And that can be the same church. I don't know what that gap is inside of people's mind, that they see either or, that it is one body, that it is one church, that is one building, that is one bride. So I sort of wrestle with that thing myself. What about the second half of my question?
Well, and I'll just real quick, because something you say, Lee, I think we need to keep thinking relationally, not organizationally. I think that's the key to that. We think this is my organization versus yours. It's like, no, we're the body of Christ in relationship. And I think that's what you say, Lee. So I think the second part of that question, though, is, okay, what about pastors? If I'm stepping away, what do I do? And I think that's one of the things we're finding ourselves as we're coaching pastors that are transitioning out of their role into, pioneering disciple making, simple church work in their cities, is that's a big question. What do I do to feed my family? What are the implications for my family? And I think the really cool thing is the Lord does it with each of us so differently and so uniquely. And for some folks that have walked this journey, they go raise funds and they're like a missionary. For other folks, they just go get a job in the marketplace and have incredible access to people that don't know the Lord there. It's an opportunity for the gospel to go forth and make disciples. Some people, it's a combination. It's like there's so many different ways that a lot of times we're finding our coaches will walk with them, not to say this is the way you have to do it, but to explore what the Spirit's saying and help them see like there's a ton of different ways that you can do this to support your family. And so I guess I would say like that's not a one size fits all, but there are a ton of options. But it's scary to walk away from the security of the paycheck to say, what's going to happen when I get out there? But you could talk to person after person who've made that transition, and they'll just give you testimony after testimony of God's faithfulness and provision in it. He does it, man. That's what he says he'd do, right? He does that. He's our provider.
So let's say I'm a pastor and I'm like, all right, I'm willing to do this. I'll take the risk of stepping out of where I'm at right now just because I feel called to do this. What would you start telling me as a pastor to start doing or not doing, or what to pursue next?
So one of the simplest ways is, and again, it's not like about a program, but pastortopioneer.com is a landing spot for a lot of people, just an entry point where then we connect you in relationship with a coach. And a coach is someone who used to be a pastor in a traditional setting who is now pioneering disciple making simple church work in their city. And I think the key to this isn't just training you in more information, but to connect you with somebody in relationship. And so as you're connected to that trainer, that coach in relationship, they may gather you in a cohort with others to walk through some of these paradigm shifts and practice changes. But I think so much of it's about that relationship. And so I think that's the most important thing, is to get you connected to someone who can walk with you through this, not just get you information. Does that make sense? Am I answering your question, Roger?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there is, a lot to saying, like, it's not just a package or a program that you're pushing people through, but people who can walk alongside you to learn how to do this. I mean, you can point to even Jesus doing that with his disciples. He was like, basically, they started doing what he was doing, but it started with them following him around for 3 years, and then lo and behold, when they did it, they also had people come with them to show them. But
totally. I mean, to your point, there is structure, right? We have 10 weeks, 10 sessions that we walk through, but that's just a catalyst for conversation and wrestling through things together. And so we walk through with the coaches, walk through pastors for 10 weeks in a cohort setting, and then ongoing relationship after that.
Okay. Like, what do you do in those 10 weeks though? Like, what do you try to train them on or teach them to do?
We actually don't. Pastors are different, right? So in a lot of training that we all do, we teach them to obey and share right away. Well, pastors are so used to sharing things before we're used to obeying them that we actually just slow things down to get them to wrestle in their own heart. What does this mean for them, and to obey, and to not just go blast it to other people right away. And we don't teach a model right away. We teach general principles. We started what love, moving from like to love, and are we marked by love? And what it would look like if the church was marked by love. We talk about shifting our mentality about what maturity is, what the church is, what a pastor is, teaching and preaching, some of those things. And it's not later on. Then we get into some of the models of how do you meet in a simple way? How do you make disciples? But we just go through a lot of common questions we've been asked, or common barriers, or common hangups people have to step into a more decentralized network of house churches and disciple making.
Hey, Britton, first of all, congratulations. You're the first one to say relational before organizational before Lee does on the podcast. Second of all, if there is a pastor out there who is listening to this and maybe thinking, hey, I thought I was the only one struggling with this, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I get that. I felt that way too. And it's when you started connecting in relationship, you start being like, we're not alone in this. And you spurring one another on, because stepping into something new or wrestling through these big questions can be scary or can be lonely. And just to know that you're not alone in that, and there's others that are thinking through the same things or maybe a little bit ahead of you, that's what kept me going for all these years. Honestly, being connected into relationship to a number of you, it's like, okay, I can keep going. Okay, you're spurring me on to keep following the Lord in something else. And so I would simply say, you're not alone. That's the beauty of it. I see in so many different streams and circles and spheres around the country, the Spirit is stirring a lot of similar things. It's amazing. It may look a little different, have different language, but man, the Spirit's stirring some similar things that you're really not alone.
Similar to the last question, what if someone comes on here and not a pastor, but they're listening to this podcast, they're just a church member, and yet they've been receiving, from the Lord, some excitement here around these discussions and this topic. What would you encourage them to do in relation? Maybe their pastor has or hasn't, both ways. If the pastor isn't on board, or if the pastor is, what are the things you would encourage the church member to do?
I guess as a former pastor, I guess I wouldn't recommend they come in and be like, you got to do this and change everything. Mm-hmm. That's maybe not the approach I would go, but just for them to start walking in this. And if they're not connected to anyone who is kind of living in this way that can teach them, they can reach out as well to us at pastortopioneer.com, and we'll connect them as well to folks that are doing this and can get them trained in how to do this. But I think the thing for whether it be pastors or just any disciple is it starts with us, right? It starts with me. It starts with me wrestling with these things. It starts with me listening and obeying what God's saying in these things, and then worrying about later how it moves on to other things or to other people. I think as a pastor, even that was my biggest challenge. How are we going to get all these people to do it? And so often the Lord's like, yo, just chill out. Like, what about your own heart? What am I saying to you in this? And being faithful with the small things in my own life, and then letting the Lord reproduce those things. So I think that's what I would say. Just start with yourself and starting to live this stuff out on your own.
So I think you're aware, Britton, of the brutal facts of what those are with regard to church as we know it. I'd like to talk about loving our brothers and sisters, like that dynamic of, my wife shared on the L1A podcast the other day, is that when we start talking about like these things, multiplying disciples and churches that transform communities, and we're passionate about them. Well, I think our brothers and sisters that we love, the Bible says, who comparing themselves among themselves and measuring themselves by themselves are not wise. So I believe that our brothers and sisters, pastors, staff members, people that's all they've ever known. And they hear about these things, that what they feel, where they've invested their lives because it's all they've ever known, that
That's
they
right.
feel feelings, how people feel is how they feel, man. And they feel less than, or they think that someone is positioning themselves as better than. And so I'd have a question for people that are walking in DMM and CPM for you, is how can we better say to people that we're connected with relationally that we love, that's not how we're doing. How do we speak to church members? How do we speak to staff, and how do we speak to pastors? Take a crack at that. That was probably my best question I might have ever asked, man.
It is a good question. I think it's real. And I guess I can answer that even just like personally.
You can
for me,
answer it, man, because you did it. And like, that's the piece where I see you, like, I get that you're not pastoral. Basically somebody was I didn't even know how to set up my signature in my email the other day. So I was getting my email signature. And so somebody like started like, that was helping me with it, was going to put pastor. Man, I'm not very pastor. There's not a lot of pastoral gifting, shepherding inside of me. So I want to like be like you, and that how you were with your brothers and sisters there that you love. So that's where the question comes from, because love is the stuff, bro. Like, love will multiply. So how do we do that with one another, bro?
Yeah, you probably don't actually want to be like me in this, because I to be honest, like, I was terrible at this. And I think this is still a tough topic for me, to be honest, because like for a lot of this, to be honest with you, I got so excited, so passionate about the end result. And even in a good motive, like, I want to see the kingdom come. I want to see my city reached. I want to see the lost found. I want to see the church grow in a great maturity. I want to see multiple, all these things like that are good. But I didn't do it out of love. Therefore I used people to get to this end goal. I didn't sit long enough with them to wrestle with where they're at and hear their heart. It's like, you're not on board? Well, see ya. We got to go. And it's 1 Corinthians 13, all these things you can do this and this, but without love, it's meaningless. And I had people around me that I was working with that were like, yeah, are we loving though? Like, are we loving? I'm like, yeah, of course we're loving. I love them. Let's go. I just realized, like, over time, the Lord had to point out to me, he's like, you're not loving. You say you love these people, but do you love them? Now, I think the challenge is sometimes with that love of, that doesn't mean you don't point out what the word says, right? It doesn't mean that there's not truth, like grace and truth. Like you did to my kids. I love my kids. And so like, I want them to experience more. That's love. But to do it in a way that my heart is actually soft towards them makes the difference. And so I think I'm still on that journey of learning love, man, because I feel like I'm an infant in it. And so I think for me, I was learning to love the people, even in my own church, that I wanted to see grow into more stuff. But now, to your point, I've done a terrible job of that too, of making other people feel like that if they weren't doing disciple making or church in the simple way, I've made people feel less than. Absolutely. Because we get so excited about it that we don't understand, like, why wouldn't you want to do this? Come on, let's go. that people feel less than and they don't feel loved. And so I'm trying to figure this out now. Like I'm grateful I still have a lot of relationships with the people of the church I'm no longer the pastor of. So trying to figure out, as they've stayed in that and are committed to that, how do I love them well?
Yeah.
Because to your point, Lee, it's like our unity is not around a model. Our unity is around a man, Jesus. And so if we make our unity around a model, I think we're putting up unbiblical barriers and walls and separation and division that is not honoring to the Lord. And so I think it's having those conversations of how do we collectively grow in maturity as the family of God and reach our city, but doing this in a way of love towards one another. I'm still figuring it out, man, to be honest with you. I can't sit here and be like, well, this is all the ways I've done that, because it's like, I haven't done it well most of the time. I'm still learning how to do it well.
Keep doing what you're doing. You'll get better at it. Somebody said that.
Hey, that's right. I think the key for a lot of this, for everyone, pastors, is it's asking the Lord, what do you have for me? Because for a lot of us, we just want to, I'm tired of this. I'm burned out. I got to go. Or I'm excited about this because someone else is doing it. Sing for you. I got to go. I just think this idea of what's the Spirit saying to you, and it may be to stay, then you should stay. If it's to go do it this way or that way, it's about what's the Spirit saying to you, not a one size fits all.
Are you encouraged by the number of people, pastors, who've already approached you guys and, reaching out to you?
Yeah, we just launched Pastor to Pioneer, what's it been, just a couple weeks now. And it's interesting. I even notice in myself this desire, just like, we just got to get this out there and like see all these people come through the training. And then I'm like, whoa. It's not about how many people can get to do this. It's about the right people. Where's the Spirit stirring in people's hearts? And so it's just a lot of prayer of asking, okay, God, will you bring the right people forward? And I have been so encouraged by the people that God's been bringing forward, just a steady stream of folks. And it's been young, it's been old, it's been people that are currently pastors, it's been people that haven't been pastors for a while. It's been people who aren't even pastors sometimes going, I'm not a pastor, but these things are stirring my heart. What do I do? I got something from a guy who's like, I've been at this for 30 years. I'm so excited now to see a younger generation stepping into these things, right? And so it just feels humbling that this isn't new. We're not like the only people that do this stuff, right? There's generations of people who have gone before us and pioneered a different way of making disciples and being the church. And so it's been an honor and like a humbling honor to get to connect with so many people who are at different phases of a journey, and the Lord's working in so many different ways throughout the country and beyond, honestly, in these ways, because there's many people, many pastors and former pastors that the Spirit's stirring in their heart in a lot of similar ways.
That is a perfect segue to ask, what are those stories? Can you share one or two about the people who you guys have walked with, who have taken the journey from pastor to pioneer, as you say?
I mean, honestly, as far as like walking through this training, this is so new that we're on the front end. So I think what it is, it's more stories of guys that are beginning to coach, right? These are the guys that have walked this journey in relationship with others, who some of them have quickly just recognized, okay, I'm not able to do this in my church. Let's walk in a bold step of faith. Guys that have walked away from a paycheck, moved cities to simply start a work in their city, and they're starting to see it happen. I've got a friend who's been part of this Pastor to Pioneer team with me, who moved from the South up to New England because it was one of the most unreached places in the country. And he now is seeing movement take place because he's simply been faithful to sowing seeds of the gospel. And he's seeing a regional church form there. And he walked in faith. He's like, I'm walking away from a paycheck. I'm walking away from what I know. I'm going to a place I don't know, like Abraham, right? It's just like, the Lord's going to tell me. But he's starting to live into the things, the convictions God's put on his heart in a way that's freedom, where he's not confined to maybe some set expectations, that he can do it more freely. And he's seeing movement take place in the Northeast. Now, because of that, there's a number of other movement leaders in the Northeast because of his faithfulness in that. And so now he's turning around and beginning to coach other pastors to make that transition as well. And so I think it's stories like that where you think, man, there's people that have gone before this. There's people that have gone before me. There's people that have gone before you that can turn around and simply encourage us and spur us on to say, you got this. You're not alone. It's hard some days, but God is with us. We're not alone. God is with us in this, right? And it's not on you. It's not you trying to manufacture this and come up with numbers and stats. It's walking in the intimacy with the Father and letting his spiritual life flow from within you and bear much fruit.
Amen.
And that's what I'm seeing as pastors are being released from that burden and pressure of producing numbers and running sometimes a machine to simply walking in freedom of intimacy with the Father and letting that flow from within them.
All right. Well, that's a good place to
Thanks, Britton.
close our podcast. Yeah. Thanks, Britton, for coming on. So that was, I appreciate you just being open and honest about your journey from being a pastor to try to pioneer movement work. And I think, probably there are other people maybe listening or in America that feel similar burdens. And I've even talked to some myself who are like, man, this is what I want to pursue. And so, so if you're listening to this podcast and you're one of those people, feel free to reach out either to moredisciples.com or pastortopioneer.com and directly. And we're really thankful for you, Britton, to be on.
Thanks for modeling, bro. Love you, dude.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you, Britton. Thanks, guys.
How are you making more disciples? What problems have you encountered? What successes have you celebrated? What questions do you have? Share your stories with us by visiting moredisciples.com/contact. If you're looking for next steps on growing your ability to make and multiply disciples, visit moredisciples.com to find resources, tools, and events all designed to help you make more disciples.